Welcome to the 14th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford, and today we have an interview with Brett Battles, thriller and suspense writer and author of the new book, Shadow of Betrayal, in hardback now from Delacorte Press. This interview was recorded live at Thriller Fest in New York City in July.
This is Lee Child, and I'm listening to the Reading and Writing Podcast.
Today I'm at Thriller Fest in New York City, speaking with Brett Battles, author of The Cleaner, The Deceived, and the brand new novel Shadow of Betrayal that has just been published by Delacorte Press. Welcome to the Reading and Writing Podcast, Brett.
Well, thank you for having me.
Good. Your books feature Jonathan Quinn, a professional cleaner. Can you explain to the listeners exactly what a cleaner is? Because we're not talking about a house cleaner here.
No, it's not. I mean, he's a janitor of a different sort, if you will. Quinn is a guy who comes in and gets rid of the bodies and makes them disappear so no one will ever find them again. He's not the one who actually creates the bodies, but he's the one who takes them out,
right,
and loses them per se. Although occasionally he'll have to create the bodies, but that's unintentional.
Sure.
In the most part.
I'm curious, in your research for the series or for the first book, is this actually kind of a job that's out there, or is this something that you?
There are some literary references of the job. Actually more film, if you will, like Harvey Keitel in Pulp Fiction,
right,
Jean Reno in La Femme Nikita.
Right.
So it's not necessarily a new idea, and I got to believe that these people exist. But
sure.
Do I know for sure? Probably best not to say.
Yeah, right. I wonder if you could give us a brief synopsis or glimpse of Shadow of Betrayal, your latest novel.
Sure. Shadow of Betrayal is a story. The story centers around the fact that Quinn had previously promised his biggest client that he would do 3 jobs for him without asking any questions if the client would help him with some personal matters that happened in the past. Well, now is the time that the client is calling those 3 jobs in. And so Quinn has to do these jobs, which seem to spiral a little bit more and more and start to unlayer a conspiracy that is threatening not just the U.S. government, but several governments and the stability of basically the world's security in the end. And he is forced to, if he doesn't do something about it, nobody will be able to do anything about it.
Sure, and that's in bookstores now, right?
It is in bookstores now. It came out on the 8th, Tuesday, whatever Tuesday was.
July 8th.
Yes.
In an earlier interview that I read with you, you mentioned your love of reading the Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators series when you were a kid.
I love that. I love Jupiter Jones and Pete and all. They had the place in the junkyard, and they created the tunnels that they got to go through. I just love that stuff. That was great.
Sure. I was wondering if you. I mean, you already did it to an extent. I wondered if you could, describe it for someone who may be listening who hasn't read the Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators.
Well, it's been a long time since I've read them, so chances are, if I read them again, I'd go, "This is what was I thinking?" But maybe not. I'm sure
you're not the only person who read and loved them.
Yeah, they were fantastic.
Yeah.
It was these 3 kids. I think they were young teenagers, probably 13, 14. I can't remember exactly their age. One of them's uncle, I think it was Jupiter Jones' uncle, I think it was the uncle who owned a junkyard. And they built a clubhouse out in the middle, and you had to go through all these tunnels through the junk to get to the clubhouse. And Jupiter, he was the one who fancied himself an investigator and being able to figure things out, kind of a modern day Sherlock Holmes in a way.
Right.
And then his 2 friends, one's name was Pete, I believe, and the other, I can't remember what the other guy's name was, were along to help him. And somehow along the way, in the first book, they meet Alfred Hitchcock, who kind of becomes their advisor. But he only makes like one or two appearances per book, and it's just very short things. It's almost like his appearances in his films in a way. And it's my understanding, actually, the books came out later after Hitchcock died. They re-released them, but they just as the three investigators, and they took Alfred Hitchcock out. I don't know if that's true, but I've heard that's the case.
Yeah,
kind of odd.
I think there was some it was a weird story because I researched it online one time, and it turned out that a lot of them were ghost written, not by the original writer.
Right.
And then also I know I'm pretty sure that there was like an updated version sometime in the 80s, maybe late 80s, early 90s, which I never looked at those.
Well, I think Gail Lynn's late husband was one of the ghost writers on that.
Exactly.
And and which is perfectly believable because I believe the Hardy Boys all have the same author on it, and they're all ghost written there. And same with Nancy Drew. All that it's just having a consistent author name on there, but it has nothing to do with who wrote them. But yeah.
So you were reading that. Was that it? Was that any kind of indication? I mean, have you always read kind of mystery or suspense?
I have. I mean, I think I split my time as a kid and into my teenage years between mystery and suspense and science fiction.
Sure.
As a boy, you're always getting into science fiction. My dad was huge. My dad's still huge into science fiction. So he got me started on that. But they're definitely with the suspense. I read the Three Investigators when I was younger, and then as I started getting a little older, the Alistair MacLean books, like Ice Station Zebra, Guns of Navarone, where Eagles Dare or something like that. There's a whole mess of them. I remember reading. I just devoured those books, and they were great. And then that led me on to The Eagle Has Landed with Jack Higgins, and then Black Sunday, which was just awesome.
Yeah.
And from there, when I probably around the time I was 21, 22, someone introduced me to an author named Robert Ludlum. And who we all know,
right?
And I mean, not personally because he's not around to know anymore, and I just don't know him. But I just read everything at that time that he read or wrote, and every time a new book would come out, I would read the new Robert Ludlum, and then when Bourne came out, it was like, oh my God, this is great.
Yeah.
And I just remember all that. Although to a certain extent, a lot of Ludlum's stories. Not all of them, but a lot of them were the same story.
Sure.
Just different characters set in different countries.
Right.
But they were fun. They were really a lot of fun. I remember that. So,
yeah, exactly. They're still amazing the first time you read them.
Yeah, it's just a ton of fun.
Yeah.
And so that kind of got me into the whole thing.
Sure. So at that point, were you actually at that point thinking about writing or even trying to write?
Well, I have, believe it or not, I have told everyone that I was going to be an author since I was probably about 11 years old. And that was always what I was going to be. I mean, what I told people. Sure. Now, I kind of got sidetracked for many years in the adult years, but it was always something that was there. And I'd go through, months or a couple of years sometimes where I really wouldn't write much of anything.
Right.
But then I'd get into a fever and I'd start writing again and everything. And I finally just sat down and really just started doing it and just every second that I could.
Right.
And because I said, this is what I really want. I've got it.
Right.
If I don't do it, it's not going to happen. And so it finally happened.
And so was The Cleaner, was that actually the first book you'd ever written, or had you written?
No, it was actually I had probably by that point had started 50 different books.
Wow.
Maybe half a dozen of them made it to 100 or 150 pages.
Right.
I had actually finished 2 books, completed books before I wrote The Cleaner. 2 books which will never see the light of day.
Right.
I consider them my training books.
Sure.
And actually, before I even sold The Cleaner, while it was out, and it took a while for it to sell, but while it was out, I wrote another book. So I wrote a 4th book, which I have never actually sent out since
Right,
then, because
right.
then I sold the cleaner, and I just got pulled into the whole Quinn world,
Sure.
and that's kind of where I've been ever since then.
Sure, and if I'm not mistaken, you had kind of an interesting path to publication with
Yes.
Delacorte. So I
Yeah,
wonder
I
if,
did.
if you could kind of
did.
talk about that. What was that
Sure.
process like?
It was. There was at times exhilarating, and at times completely depressing, and at times I thought I was that nothing was going to happen, and I never gave up on the whole idea of writing, but I did many times get to the point where I thought this was not going to be the book that was going to do it for me.
Right.
What happened was, in a nutshell, I tried querying agents and everything like most writers do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I must have queried 60, 70 agents, I just blanketing everything out there. And I just wasn't getting the response. Very few, if any, asked to look at any of the book. And perhaps my query letter was bad. I don't know. Now looking back on it, it must have been bad. I don't know. But I was about ready to give it up. And then a friend of mine suggested that I send the book to this small publisher in Los Angeles that he happened to be being published with at the time. And the publisher is Uglytown, and the friend was Nathan Walpaugh, who writes some great books, but he's very not a lot of people have read him, unfortunately, but he's very funny, very great books. But I took Nathan's advice and I sent the manuscript to the guys at Uglytown. It's basically run by two guys in Los Angeles, and that was in like early February, and I didn't hear anything until, well, I didn't hear anything through the spring, through the summer, and I finally said, okay, you know what, I got to write something else. And so I start writing this fourth book that I talked about, and I'm writing, and then finally in November, I get this email. It's kind of like almost like a group email, but it says something like, hi, we know you've all submitted work to us when we haven't been able to get back to you, but we just want to let you know we'll get back to you within a month. And I'm sitting there going, oh, okay, that's nice, but probably doesn't mean anything, so I keep working on my book. That month passes, nothing happens. We're into January. I'm actually at a Starbucks doing edits because I had finished the fourth book, and now I'm doing some revisions and stuff. And I get a phone call from Jim Pasco at Uglytown, and he proceeds to tell me that they want to buy my book. And I'm just like, I'm like on cloud nine. It's a small publisher. It's not really any kind of lucrative contract or anything, but I'm getting my foot in the door at that point. And I'm just like happy to be in the game. He tells me at that time, this is January, he tells me at that time they want to bring me out in October, so they want to fast track it through and bring it out in October. I said, great, that sounds wonderful to me.
Let's roll.
Yeah, let's do it. So things were going along and making revisions and everything like that, and then come middle of that summer, they stopped answering my phone calls and my emails for about a week and a half. And I'm starting to think, oh God, something's up, And sure enough, they finally give me a call and they said, look, we have had some financial setbacks due to a distributor who had gone bankrupt and a couple of other things, and we are going to have to cease operations. Maybe for just a little while, maybe, we don't know. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm back to square one. They said, well, don't think that we'd like to bring your book out, but we might be the spring, but we're not really sure. And, I got a sense that it was maybe 10% possibility.
Right.
So I'm thinking nothing's going to happen, and I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board. But they did a really cool thing. They had a editor friend at Bantam Dell, which is Delacorte Bantam Dell, who had bought mass paperback rights from them from some of their other books. And they sent her my manuscript. And long story short, she ended up buying my contract from Uglytown and then giving me a 3-book deal. And all of a sudden, I went from like this really small to this big public. It's like going. I always say it's like
a story that never happens.
Right, it never happens. It's like going from the like a single A baseball farm team to the Yankees.
Wow.
And I did it all without an agent too. which was both good and bad.
Sure. Do you have an agent now?
I do have an agent now. Yeah, I got one within a few months after that happening. Although I wish I had had one at the time, but it's all right. It all worked out. It all worked out, and they've been great. Bantam Dell has been incredible. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's
very
great.
happy with them.
So I'm curious, during this whole process of the years that you were writing in spurts and then would work on other novels, what were you doing kind of your day job? I'd read that you worked in the entertainment industry.
I did work. I worked for about 20 years, maybe even just a little. No, I think it ended up being just about 20 years. I've worked in television, specifically in the motion graphics end of television, which is the people who make main titles for TV shows, who make all the graphics that go on the promos. That when you see a promo for a show, let's say it's Burn Notice.
Sure.
And they, at the beginning of Burn Notice, you'll have the logo down there in the corner and everything. That's the graphics. At the end, you have this page that comes up and it says what time and what days the show's on. That's all the graphics. That's all graphic stuff.
Right.
There's a graphic on every network's. There's always graphics going, and people don't even see them. Don't even realize it. But there's tons of that stuff, and so that I just kind of fell into that. I wasn't one of the people who actually made the stuff. I was the producer, so I was like the project manager. And by the end, before I was able to finally quit and write full time, I was an executive producer at E Entertainment, doing graphics for E Channel and for Style Channel. Style Network, sorry, Style Network. They'd kill me if I said Style Channel. But I don't work for them anymore.
Yeah. Great. So, believe it or not, there was actually a time in the 1990s following the demise of the Cold War when some people declared that espionage books or international thrillers were going to become relics.
I've heard that.
But unfortunately, the realities of today's politics and global conflicts offer lots of rich material for international thrillers. And I was just curious, when you start thinking about a new book, where do you get some of your ideas? What do you look to for inspiration?
Right. I think I'm both passive and active in my inspiration. Passively, I'm just taking in everything that's happening around me in life. If I read something in the news just on chance, or just see something without actually meaning to see something.
Sure.
And then sometimes I'm actually leafing through stuff just to get some ideas and stuff like that. But really, mainly for me, what happens, I always start out with like a scene or a situation. For instance, in The Deceived, my second book, which just came out in paperback, I started off with the idea of what if Quinn gets hired for a job in Los Angeles where he lives, and he seldom does work at home, but he gets hired for a job in Los Angeles, that there's a body has arrived at the port in a container, and they want him to get rid of it. But what if he goes to get rid of that body, and when he opens the container and starts to pull the body out, he realizes that it's a body of a friend of his. What happens then? And so I have that situation, that setup.
Right.
Not really sure where it's all going to go at that point, but I use that to just kind of as my jumping off point.
Right.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads me into my next question in terms of like what the writing process is like for you. Once you have that kind of jumping off point, do you sit down at some point and actually work on an outline, or do you just kind of outline as you go and kind of see where it takes you?
If I had my choice, I would never outline.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because contractually, I have to give Bantam Dell a synopsis, and I usually give them like 20, 30 pages that of the beginning of the book, so that they feel like, okay, I like the idea of where this is going. And quite honestly, more times than not, the story I end up writing has nothing to, well, has little, not nothing, but has little to do with the synopsis I gave.
Right.
And the pages that I wrote, chances are I'm not even using them. I know that happened with Shadow of Betrayal, for instance. I actually, I thought I was going to use them. I wrote 50 or 30, I think I wrote 30 pages. and I thought that I was going to use them, but when I finally sat down to actually start the book, I go, no, this isn't right. This isn't how the book should start. And it took on a whole different flavor, and I did something completely different than what I had, how I had started before. The basis of the story was still there, but there was a whole other part of the story that I had never even mentioned before that worked out great. So.
Great.
Yeah.
I was curious, who are some of the writers that inspire you and that you read for enjoyment and inspiration? No.
Well, I have it's always a changing list, of course, and everything.
Sure.
My perennial favorites. I love Graham Greene, and I'm a big Haruki Murakami fan. I don't always understand what he's writing, not because he writes in Japanese. I read the English translations,
right?
But because I'm not really sure what his message is. But it's just incredible. He evokes these images that are just mind-blowing to me sometimes. I have a couple of contemporary people that I know. Well, Murakami's still contemporary, he's still writing,
sure.
But I'm a big fan of Tim Hallinan, who's actually here at Thrillerfest.
Right.
He writes these incredibly beautiful stories, thrillers set in Bangkok, and he's got this literary style that is just kind of pulls me in, and I find it very hard to stop reading. He's got a new one coming out next month that I luckily got an advance copy, and it was so good. It's really great.
That's great.
Who else? I have some friends that I read who, not because they're my friends, because I enjoy their work. Robert Gregory Brown, for instance, is somebody who I read. Bill Cameron is somebody who I read. The list goes on. And the list goes on and on. I don't read as much as I used to, though. And now that I'm reading less than I did when I wasn't writing full time. So
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. It's just. You're reading a lot all day while you're writing.
Exactly. So there's been a lot of discussion in the business media, especially about the rise of the Kindle. Obviously, Sony has their reader, and there's been discussions that they're probably going to soon bring out one that has the wireless capability that the Kindle has.
Right.
And with the rise of ebooks, I'm just wondering, is that something that you think about in terms of the impact on
Absolutely.
book publishing?
How can we not think about it? I mean, it's the future. Bring it on, as far as I'm concerned, because it's the way things are going to. I mean, I don't think the printed book is ever going to go away.
Sure.
But I think more and more. The amount of printed books sold is going to start coming down, and the amount of ebooks sold is going to start going up, and there's going to reach a point of equilibrium. And I think at some point, 10, 15 years from now, or maybe sooner, you never know, because music just went completely changed. I think they're going to flip. I think more people will do the ebooks than they'll do the hardcover, or even the paperbacks, just because it's easier. It's new technology. We just should embrace it and go with it, as far as I'm concerned.
And what impact do you think that'll have in terms of book publishing?
Well, I think it's going
to. I'm not sure. I mean,
I don't. I'm not. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I'm not sure. Unfortunately, that a lot of publishers are prepared for, especially in terms of the price point.
Right.
Because that's what happened with the music business. They were still selling CDs for $17 or $18, and suddenly people came along and started associating a CD with 8 digital files on it, and would rip it onto their computer. And I think that when people associate downloading a book as downloading a file, that it's going to be difficult to get that $25 hardback.
Oh, I think so too. I think you're looking more at mass paperback prices than you are at hardcover. It's fine. And chances are you're going to sell more too.
Right.
So which is fine. And even if you price them even lower, if you price them $5 each, you're going to get a lot more impulse buys.
Sure.
And which is fine. Although you really want everybody to read everything that you're that they're downloading, but it's just the way it's going. I think publishers are kind of scrambling to try to figure out what's going on. I hope they're making the right moves. I know there has been a lot of consolidation in the last 6 months. Within, I mean, even at Bantam Dell, there a lot of things have changed and consolidated there, trying to get leaner and meaner.
Right.
And so I'm hoping that they see this. I think they do. I know some people there do. And we also have the model of what happened to the music industry, of what not to do. So let's hope we don't make that mistake. You know, but if not, I think as the artist, as the writer, we are less. I mean, as long as we're willing to roll with it and be willing to try new things and everything, I think we are in a less susceptible position than the publishers themselves.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean that's unfortunate for publishers because I think eventually, personally, I think that at some point, and it may not be a year, it may not be 5 years, but at some point we're going to open up the New York Times and someone on the level of Stephen King or Dean Koontz is going to call their publisher and say, I just signed a deal with Jeff Bezos to bring out my next book.
I don't see anything wrong with that. I see the potential of authors maybe getting together in a co-op kind of situation and hiring editors and PR people to work for them.
Sure.
You know, and in effect becoming their own publishing company. But I do
kind
think...
of United Artists.
Right. Exactly, like United Artists. I do think, though, the thing that publishers can jump on and have the advantage and take advantage of this is the fact that they do have the editing expertise.
Without a doubt.
And the PR and all this stuff. They can if that's what they're packaging, because you know, we're nothing without our editors.
Oh, absolutely. There has to be a gatekeeper.
Right, exactly.
Because all you have to do is, unfortunately, go to iUniverse. And
exactly.
You have to have gatekeepers.
Exactly. And you'll have a lot of books up on the electronic, up on like Kindle or whatever, that are self-published. That, I mean, some of them are probably really good, but some of them are probably would need some editing. Would be a big help. And
exactly.
And if you have the editor to help you out, that's the publishers can push that and then create a brand that way. So you know quality is coming because this one has been edited and it's been it's had the watchdog, it's got PR behind it, it's all this other stuff. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Given all of your experiences that we've talked about in terms of your path to publication and all the writing that you did prior to selling your first book, I wonder what kind of advice you would give to aspiring writers as they're sitting there trying to sell their first book or write their first book.
All right. Well, first of all, write it, finish it, and then start the next one. Even as you're sending the queries out, start the next one, and don't expect the first one to be the one that sells. You know, great baseball players, even the best baseball players, even the ones that Dave Winfield, for instance, in baseball, went from high school straight into the major leagues, I believe, which is amazing. Mm-hmm. But he did play baseball before he got into the major leagues. He practiced for years, even through high school. You know, he the first time he got on the field was not the first time he played the game.
Sure.
So if your first book doesn't make it, it's not a disaster. You're learning. These books are training grounds. These are it is an incredibly useful tool. You know, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the books that I wrote that will never see the light of day, because they are the foundation on which I improved my craft. And always know that your craft can improve, no matter how good you are. Your craft can always improve. I'm constantly trying to improve it. I'm sure Stephen King is constantly trying to improve his craft. You're never going to be perfect. You just have to, and if you realize that and you work at it, then it's going to be all the much better. You can't go in with the attitude that my stuff is great and you should buy my stuff and take it right away because this is the best thing ever written, because that's not going to get you anywhere. And that attitude is going to soon be evident to any publisher that's trying to buy your stuff, perhaps, and they're not going to want to help you out if they find that out.
Sure.
You know.
Okay, so as we wrap up, I just wanted to remind everyone that your new book is in hardback, Shadow of Betrayal. It's in bookstores now.
Yep.
And also your second book is in mass market, The Deceived, and that's in bookstores now as well. Just came out.
All right. And the first book's still out there.
And the cleaner is still out there. Still out there. And so if someone is interested in finding out more, where can they find you online?
Well, I'm at www.brettbattles.com. Very easy, Brett with 2 T's. So I'm right there. Plenty of information right there.
Great,
on it.
and I'll add a link to the show notes as
Thank
well.
you.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to my latest interview. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to leave me some feedback about the podcast, you can leave a voicemail on my Google voicemail line, and I can feature your comment in a future podcast. You can simply call 413-84-BOOKS. That's 413-84-BOOKS. Or it's 413-842-6657. Again, that's 413-842-6657. Also, if you enjoyed listening to the podcast, I would love to get a review in iTunes so that more people could find the podcast in the iTunes store. It's very simple. Go to the podcast in the iTunes store and just leave a review or a comment. Thanks a lot, and we'll be back soon with another interview with a writer that you enjoy reading.
This is Kevin J. Anderson, and whenever I'm not reading or writing, I enjoy listening to the Reading and Writing podcast.
There are so many reasons not to skip breakfast. So many savory, mouth-watering, tasty, delicious beyond all belief reasons. Actually, that last one was pretty convincing. Stop by for a McDonald's breakfast. Mix and match a sausage biscuit, sausage McMuffin, sausage burrito, or hash browns, any two for just $2. Price and participation may vary, cannot be combined with combo meal.
Meyer brand lunches keep kids fueled for back to school. Start with a wholesome sandwich made with our honey-roasted deli-sliced turkey breast and provolone slices on Meyer's split-top wheat bread. Add a side of fruit with Meyer applesauce squeezable pouches. Treat them at school, after school, or anytime with assorted fruit-flavored snacks. And pack it all up fresh and neat with Meyer brand sandwich bags and napkins. Discover big taste and bigger savings when you go back to school with Meyer brand.